It's that if we as educated people don't engage state action, then violent people will engage the state. Violent people will create violent policies. Does that make sense? So it's like if all the leftists just refuse to start engaging, stop voting, stop trying to get their Congress people elected, then who's going to fill in? Who's going to get elected? The right. Yeah. You know what I mean? The Tea Partiers, etc. These people will get elected. And that argument is that undercuts their overall project. Does that make sense? So it's like, if you're reading a framework argument to respond to a critical act, this critical act likely will have leftist leanings. And so your argument should be that a refusal to engage the state on an educational level means that we don't have the tools to respond to right-wing reactionaries. They fill in, and that undermines our ability to do anything. Does that make sense? Or they don't try and the AF's ability to do anything. So think of it very much as a turns the case type argument, right?
Is it almost just like kind of trying to avoid talking about any federal action?
Sure, yeah. There are definitely cards that say that, yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the link argument.
It just reframes it to the state.
Yes. Yeah, the argument is that we should have a starting point that is state action, and that is preferable. Does that make sense? So a good example, I guess, if someone didn't defend a ban of handguns, right, for the LD topic, and they sort of just talked about handguns being bad, didn't defend anything necessarily, you could very much read an argument that says, hey, focus on the state, or else reactionaries fill in, and those people aren't going to ban anything at all. In fact, they make the problem much worse. Does that make sense? Or the problem they isolated much worse, rather. Does that make sense? Yeah? Questions? So, framework. It's a pretty good argument. Y'all should probably, you should definitely invest in it, but at the same time, don't let it preclude trying to engage the literature. Don't let it preclude your ability to sort of think about different ways to answer critical acts. Does that make sense? Like I was saying, not all K authors agree with each other. So it's a good idea to do that. So a good way to sort of think about it is there are Marxists, right, who say that capitalism is a bad thing, okay? And there are feminists who their main priority is just increasing wages for women, right? Like it's a wage differential argument. So Marx's big criticism of this feminist project is like, hey, we agree with you. It is messed up the way women are treated economically. However, the focus of your entire project is let's make capitalism better, right? It's let's increase wages so that we can consume more, right? So think about it that way. It's like, yes, they are both leftists, right? Like feminists that are trying to increase wages, and Marxists. But do you see how they sort of differ on these subjects? Does that make sense? Right? That's sort of a way that you sort of want to start thinking about it. So another good example is last year on the ocean. Do y'all coach policy debate? Sometimes? What about y'all? Yeah? No? Is it primarily LD or?
Yeah, we're LD. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to give a stick example and then we'll talk about LD because I think I've judged a couple of LD rooms and I kind of remember the topics. So policy, last year was the ocean topic, right? Some people were talking about the ocean as a metaphor, right? A metaphor for our fear or anxiety, and they said that we should confront our fear and anxiety. Does that make sense? Like, sort of that type of argument?
That was a critical act?
That was a critical act, yeah.
I never encountered this.
Okay, well.
Is that what you ran?
No. We actually, our team was, we wrote a policy app on the app and on the neg, we primarily we wrote case a lot. But there was an app that was, yes.
I believe in policy and then we get rejects it. But the kids tend to want to do critiques. And I will interject again, he's right. I mean, on 4A, 5A, 6A level, that's what it's going to be. And eventually. And I think where you guys are teaching right now, probably not for a really long time. But I think eventually it's going to creep down there. So I didn't think we would ever.
My district already does.
What district are you from?
It's the same one as Salado.
Oh, I know where Salado is. Okay, so you coach there?
Well, I coach at Taylor.
Okay.
So I get to compete against Salado.
Okay.
It's fun. Not fun.
I understand. So ocean topic, yes, that existed. That act existed, yes.
So they just, okay,
One of the
so
actually-
when they run a critical act, they just get up and say, we don't have a plan, but the
They don't say we don't have a plan. They just say our affirmation is exploring the ocean as a site for us to reverse our anxiety. Does that make? You sort of see how there's like a metaphor for the ocean, right? Actually, the top team of the nation for a long time last year was reading this app. I don't know if you've heard Cato Magnet out of Louisiana. They were reading this app, and so our approach to it was going to be that understanding the ocean as a metaphor is incorrect, that we should understand it materially. And we had a bunch of cards that said understanding it materially is necessary because the ocean is abused materially, right? It's not just a metaphor. The ocean is consumed. We go, we destroy it, we dump in it, we manage its resources violently, and global warming is increasing acidification. Those are all bad things, and those are material bad things that are happening to it. An understanding of it as a metaphor is wrong. So you sort of see how there's framework to answer it, but there's also critical authors that are just like, no, this is bad, this is dumb. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, so always sort of think about it from different angles by which you can respond to it. NLD, how long ago was the drones topic? I remember maybe a few years back there was a drones topic.
Never that one.
You don't remember that one?
They're from North Carolina.
Did it change in Texas?
Yeah, we have the same one.
It's the same one all countries.
I think it was like about 2 years ago, there was a drone topic. Y'all change topics a lot.
Every 2 years, every 2 months.
Every 2 months. So there's a drones topic, and it was just like we should increase drone attacks, right? And some people refused to engage that at all. They were just like, drones are really bad. Drones are really bad, and they just sort of read different accounts from like people who were affected by drones. They didn't read a plain text about anything. They just said, I'm sorry?
I was saying so.
Yeah, sure. They didn't read a plain text. They sort of just read different accounts. Now, there are a variety of ways you can respond to it. The first is framework, right? It's just saying, if you think it's bad, say it's bad, right?
Yeah.
And defend.
Argue against.
Defend a reform that, you know, that stops that. Does that make sense?
So they're running this on After Day.
On the app, they were.
Then what is it? It's basically.
I'll say this. I understand the confusion when it's like.
If they get up there on app and say drones are bad, then doesn't the neg just automatically win? Well, they're saying drones are bad, so we shouldn't even talk.
I'll say that the way that critical debate functions is it exists to change the way that we evaluate things. It exists to sort of change the rules, the dynamics of the debate.
Okay.
And I mean, I understand the sort of proclivity to just be like, you know, why you're doing this, like you're not allowed to do this, but it's sort of established that kids can sort of determine, aside from speaking, like for how long they can speak, they can determine the content of the debate, right? What they're debating about, what they're saying. And while I think that's good to some extent as an educational activity because it allows them to engage things that they wouldn't normally engage. In debate, they're engaging literature that they might not ever engage. Like I've been in college a few years and I haven't read things nearly as complex as things that I've read in debate. And so that's a good thing. But I also understand the fairness side of it. I understand that it is probably a little unfair to sort of have to be prepared for these things. Does that make sense? And while I sympathize, like I said, uniqueness story, the direction of the status quo is these things are sort of going to increase. So it behoove everyone to just sort of be like, we know it's going to happen, so let's get involved. You know what I mean? Let's get engaged with these things. And yes, it's frustrating. Before we went to the TOC in May, there was a month where I was kind of just holed up in my room, and I was prepping for like 26 apps, and I was just there, and you know, I had to think of a new way to answer something. But it's like it's good. It's good that the kids get to engage those things. You know what I mean? So, like I said, open mind. Always sort of keep an open mind about it. I'm just going to start opening floors up to questions. I want to emphasize, like, if you have questions about specific examples, that'd be great. Like, say you've seen something you don't understand, be happy to answer things. I'm not like, you know, I'm not a K genius by any stretch of the imagination. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the literature. I'd be happy to try and explain things. If you have questions about it, the specific examples, that'd be great. If you have questions about, like, theory that you've heard or you're interested in engaging, I can give you a bunch of literature, a bunch of sites, whatever. So that not all narratives are the same, right? They have different content, they have different agendas, right? They even have different interpretations. So it's always about engaging the content. If there's a lot of people that would read poetry and hip hop sometimes, and they would tell specific stories. Our response would usually be that these accounts, these narratives, these type of forms of communication are commodified by capitalism, right? Hip hop is a pretty good example of that. They're commodified by capitalism and only serve the purpose of helping the market. And then our second linked argument would be your focus on yourself excludes the way that oppressive structures are structures. They affect everyone. Does that make sense? So accounts, personal accounts only care for the self, right? So there's sort of different ways that we respond to that. But I would say if you have a narrative in mind, I'll like you know.
That actually makes me feel good because that was actually the strategy I think my data run.
Cool, yeah, like I mean, and you know, there's always better cards out there. So always be researching, right? Like always be sort of like looking for different ways to approach these things. So like I think a pretty good example is just like, you know, people talk about privilege a lot, right? And they give like personal accounts of the way that they were oppressed, but they sort of ignore the way that it's oppressed everyone. Does that make sense? And focusing solely on yourself ignores the structure, the larger structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Examples? I think my main theme again that I want to emphasize, don't be scared. Like these things are, there isn't a real divide. There isn't a policy critical divide. These things, if they're read well, they have to engage the app. So when judging these things, when coaching against these things, the question should always be, has it engaged the app, right? So if someone reads they're going to read a critique against your app and you're coaching a team that reads a policy app, always, and I have this on my judging philosophy, emphasize to your teams not to forget their impacts. Largely, their impacts will function as offense against the critique, right? People would read the CAPK against us all the time, and we'd say, how does the alternative solve warming? And they'd say, well, you know, we would just stop consuming. And we'd say, you don't have a strategy for stopping consuming. We were a nuclear energy app, and we'd give incentives for the market to, you know, increase nuclear energy production. That's a strategy for solving warming. What's yours? Does that make sense?
So basically, like, because a lot of times I see, especially at my school's level, it's a small 4A.
Yeah, I was a 4A school,
I see poorly run things. And so it's hard for me to understand like, how it's actually supposed to work when I see those.
I sympathize completely. 2 years ago, before 4A turned to 5A, I judged the 4A finals, I think. And they read Nietzsche against an app that was like, let's give food to people who are hungry. And that would stop food wars also. And they read this Nietzsche K, they didn't really explain it very well, so I mean, I kind of intervened, honestly. I was just like, well, there's an impact here. The food wars are bad and people are hungry, so the app outweighs. And the app said we outweigh a bunch of times. Like
so
there was
has to be some structure.
There has to be a structure. Exactly. There has to be, if they're going to read a critique that says don't care about their impacts, they need a reason why. You know what I mean? And it's perfectly reasonable for you to go in assuming that you care about people, that you think that, you know, you'll default to whoever has a better policy that saves more people, right? That's what you're going to vote for. Does that make sense? It's perfectly reasonable for you to have that assumption going in. But if there is a point in the debate where the debaters have shifted or have shifted the calculus, the way that you evaluate those things, you sort of have to go with it. You can't just like, you know, be like, well, no, thank you. Unless, you know what I mean? Yeah, unless the other team is persuading you more, I suppose, you kind of have to go with it until there is a response. Does that make sense? Yeah? No?
And then if they are structured poorly like that, they don't engage the impacts of the app, is it just in order to go against the K or to refute the K for that reason, how would you frame that? Like, how would you frame the argument saying that they're not engaging the app's impact?
Sure. Well, that's very simple, honestly. If they haven't established a link argument, all you have to say is no link. All you have to say is they haven't given a reason why the 1AC is a bad idea, particularly in this Nietzsche debate. They just said suffering was bad, but I didn't really know why. Or they said suffering was good, and I don't really know why. But this other team said hey, people are starving, that's really bad, that's gonna make wars happen between nations, we can stop that.
Something tangible.
Well, it's not necessarily a tangible
Or
thing.
just, like, measurable.
It's sort of like a measurable thing, but it's also just, you haven't given a warrant, right? You haven't established an impact why suffering is bad. Here's an example. Like, if they wrote an EGK that said suffering was good, if they were just right against this food wars app, and they had an impact that was just like, we start resenting these people, we treat them as third world countries, that increases like some sort of racism towards them, right? If we help them in this instance, that's an impact.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's an impact. Now, later on in the debate, in the rebuttals, there's a debate about whether or not that outweighs this food war crisis, right? But that's an impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? Like, until you're hearing why the link argument means anything, right? They don't have an impact. So,
All right, when you were talking about framework, you said, like, let's say your opponent, I think the example you said was, let's say your opponent didn't include reasons why to vote on their framework in their case. So, when would you preemptively include framework in your constructive, and how much is appropriate?
well, I'm not a huge fan of, so like, I don't know if you have to preempt it ever. So in a 1AC, if you're reading a policy app, our policy app that we read this year, I think it was pretty good. We just had a bunch of reasons why the state was necessary to promote nuclear energy. Those are your preempts, right? Your preempts are your solvency cards that give reasons why your plan text uniquely is key to solve your impacts, okay? Those are the preempts to answer a criticism.
Okay.
So whenever they read a cap K, I always said, what's the first question you ask in cross-X? And our first question was, how do you solve warming? And the other team would just be like, well, we, stop engaging in capitalism. And then Francesco would just be like, well, that doesn't do anything. Only market incentives do something to stop global warming. And those were the two ARs, you know what I mean? Now, if you're negative and you're responding to an app that doesn't defend anything, that doesn't defend any hypothetical action, the 1NC, you put a framework shell in there. You just say, you don't defend these things. The United States federal government is an agency that exists in Washington, D.C. The resolution assumes that you are going to defend hypothetical implementation of something, right? And this is unfair. And you read fairness arguments. You read arguments about why they should engage the state. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Any examples? Like, have you seen anything that's like, just out of left field? No?
Yeah, I can't remember any though offhand, but I know I've seen stupid ones.
You've seen stupid ones?
I just can't remember. Yeah.
Did you
but
talk
I remember
about
seeing stupid
narratives?
Yeah, I think we sort of talked about that a little bit. If you have like a specific narrative in mind, just sort of like, throw it out there.
It was more about, because I agree with what your answer was about not addressing the particular content.
Yeah. The key is always to address the content. Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean like the actual narrative itself. Like, I guess it was more what the argument was with the narrative. But another case that I judged at our state tournament was
What state are you from?
Louisiana.
Okay. I've seen a little bit of this from like the seabirds and the catos of the region.
Well, I've seen a lot of when I competed at SETA.
Okay.
One of the cases I saw recently, which I kind of thought they were winning based on shock value, so they're not watching this video, was
I'm giving the lecture. No one's gonna watch it.
basically the affirmative's omission of a particular word. I think it was a citizens topic. What was the LD topic for March and April? Do you remember? Food security. Food security for its own citizens. Government's food security for its own citizens. And so the affirmative was talking about clearly its own citizens, and the negative basically ran a criticism that you're not considering any type of alien.
Yeah, so the concept of citizenship is uniquely bad because it establishes,
Well, that's what I thought initially, but their actual argument was that because the affirmative omitted that word, that was the link.
Wait, so they said omitting the concept?
Like the fact that you never discussed them at all in your plan.
Okay, yeah, so the argument was just like you have omitted the discussion of the way that the phrase or the word citizenship implies things,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So A lot of times people will read arguments about very specific words. There's lots of cards, there's lots of pieces of evidence that discuss specific words being bad. I know on the nuclear weapons topic, people would say that the word nuclear weapons was bad because it implied that they were usable, right? It implied, and then they would have a different word, to describe them. Sometimes it would be like nuclear things or something. Yes, there are words, we call those in policy debate, we call them word picks, or sometimes we say that we would defend the entirety of the act except your use of this phrase, right? And then talk about why the phrase was problematic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Okay, so in policy debate, sometimes people have pieces of evidence that have problems with particular words, right? And they say that they'll defend the entirety of the act except the use of that particular word. We call them word picks.
It's plan inclusive.
Plan inclusive counterplans is what a PIC stands for, PIC, a plan inclusive
We
counterplan.
talked about that.
Yep.
Our other session.
Okay.
Yeah, they
Well,
talk about
pigs,
that.
but he's talking about like just basically the choice of word.
Word picks, yeah. So a good example on a few years, 4 years ago when I was in high school, I read an act that said, it was the military presence topic. I don't know if y'all remember that in policy debate. It was a military presence topic, just to reduce military presence. I read an act that removed tactical nuclear weapons that were in Turkey, and people would read a pick against me that would say that you use the phrase nuclear weapons, that's bad, we say nuclear things instead. And they would read reasons why the word weapons is bad. So they were the same reasons that the act is.
So the negative is the one who's actually wanting the pick.
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because I first thought, the way you phrased it, I first thought that the affirmative was changing the resolution, wording of the resolution.
I'll say this. Sometimes critique affirmatives. This is. I'm sure some of you will roll your eyes at this. Sometimes, particularly like on the citizenship topic in college, people will read AFs that problematize the concept of citizenship, right? And so the AF will be sort of a criticism of the topic. Sort of following.
So then the neg.
So the neg sort of has to respond to a criticism of the concept of citizenship.
That's annoying.
Well, kind of. Sometimes. It depends. It's fun.
I guess if it's done.
When Glenna told me our kids stink at answering K's, come answer K's, I was just like, yes, that's what I want to do.
For those who don't do
Little did
policy,
I know.
you can probably find, you can probably easily Google, find some answer arguments to those from policy and just use a lot of the same arguments in LP.
Yeah, honestly, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of times I'll be judging LT and I'll just think, there's some good K literature that could be used here that, isn't being exploited well enough. Do you have a question? Oh, I thought you like raising your hand for a second. Yeah, there's a lot. And I can give you all my email at some point. You can all email me if you have any questions about things. But there's a lot of K literature that can be exploited. LD already lends itself to discussions of philosophy. Discussions of what we should do, right? The concept of ought and should imply some sort of ethical obligation, right? And I think that a lot of that would work, and it's just sort of like waiting to be used.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
they were telling me that a lot of their judges are parents or lay people or something like that. And I think if you can get rid of the good on these criticisms and come down to explaining it, they are really going to be powerful tools for you to use in there. You just need to make sure that they make sense and they're not this crazy stuff.
Absolutely, and that all comes down to the link debate. That all comes down to emphasizing to teams that you coach that if you want to read Ks, the way to do it is to always be talking about the app. My coach Andy in college told me that the best critiques, the best 2Ns, whenever they're reading a critique, will retell the story of the affirmative. They'll take an affirmative that said we should do this, right? And they'll retell the story of the app in a way that re-explains the way the app would actually function, right? So teams would answer our nuclear power app and they'd say, yeah, you create nuclear power, but guess where it'd be dumped? Reservations. You know what I mean? They'd retell these stories, right? They'd re-explain the app, right? And that's something that you really need to emphasize. That's something that when I coach, that when me and me and Carswell and Hunter coach, like we always were like, if you want to read K's, you have to do AF research. You have to do research that discusses the way that 1ACs function. When I was coaching this team last year, I was just like, I'll handle, researching the K stuff, but you need to be able to win that the AF wouldn't work, right? So like if we wanted to read an AF that said, or if we wanted to read a capitalism critique against any energy AF, we would have to win that energy wouldn't work, right? We'd have to win that energy could not solve or overcome the contradictions of like a competition-based market, right? Does that make sense?
I think what you just said actually just cleared everything up in my mind about McKay. And that makes a lot of sense now, just the way that you did that.
Yeah.
I think the retelling part, like if you need an example, a lot of shells come with an overview, and some of those overviews has what he's saying, and I would kind of provide like an example, like written of how that would be.
Yeah, I agree. Like a lot of things come with overviews. I also recommend, like to the kids that you coach, to like practice their own type of overviews. I always say that the best K debaters are also pretty good writers, right? They can tell a story, right? They have a pretty compelling imagination. They can think of link arguments, and if they write these things out, it'll always be easier to sort of say them later. It's easier. I'm sure the kids I coach this year can just sort of tell you the link stories off the top of their head because they read it and they wrote it so many times. But yeah, absolutely, overviews are very helpful, and eventually they won't need them anymore. Eventually, after they've read them enough, it'll just come naturally to them. They'll be able to explain to you why a certain form of renewable energy wouldn't be successful. You know what I mean? And absolutely, yeah. So yeah.
I heard PJ tell you don't be afraid of it. Most of us old folks really resisted critiques forever. And I guess maybe I just kind of accepted that the last couple of years. They're boring as you know what to read. If you're reading the literature, they just are to me. And if you can get through what they mean, and like I said, you can condense what it means, they really are powerful arguments. And plus the fact that I think you'll enjoy them. I mean, after a while, stay away from the craziness. Those are stupid. They're stupid. Kids run those just so they can think in the end. Here's some pretty good ones.
I mean, the best K debaters, they're not trying to be funny, they're not trying to mess around. The best K debaters, like, really have engaged the literature, have seriously read these books, you know what I mean? And even if you don't like them, I think that because they've done that, because at high school they've done that, they kind of deserve, to be listened to at least, you know what I mean?
They tell it like it's their story, not the
Yeah,
outsider
absolutely.
story, it's their personal story.
Well, it's like even if it's not about them, when you hear them read it, when you hear them explain things in cross-sects, it's very clear, the best ones at least, that they've taken the time, you know what I mean? They've taken the time to seriously engage this literature, and it's like that, you kind of owe it to them to like hear them out, and the other team owes it to them to respond. Like in semis of TFA State, this team was reading the same app for like a year. So we had like a year to prep for that app, you know what I mean? And, if we lost to it, it's because we didn't prepare enough, and, we kind of deserve that. But like, we had all that time, we took a lot of time to think of different strategies, and that's the point. That's like the way to do it. So real quickly, I'll talk about a couple of different things. Like I was saying, yes, there's like theory, gobbledygook, and stuff like that, but there's also just like people that don't like that theory, gobbledygook. There's people that are like, you make things too complex, right? You overthink things, you ignore material things, right? So it's like, think of it very much in terms of like sort of a dynamic where it's like people that are very language heavy, right? Those people are criticized by the people that are like, we should focus on structures, right? And, does that make sense? How there's like sort of a tension between them? Always sort of remember that there's those tensions, right? And that no matter what K people are reading, there's definitely someone that disagrees with them. Like, absolutely. There's definitely people, like Marxists particularly, they're really bitter. When you read them, you can tell they're really mad that, Russia's not around anymore, or the Soviet Union's not around anymore. So they are just bitter, and they will write the best cards about every sort of other critical theory, and, sometimes I'll just laugh to myself because I can just see like a really angry Russian smoking in his room writing this card. But yeah, so does anyone have any questions? Like, I'll give my email now if y'all want. Oh, what's up?
Question for you. All right, so we're mostly traditional LD in our area, okay? But I think the kids, and when we go national, and some of our kids, depending on who their judges are, they will run
Mhm.
more progressive arguments. But we've had some problem where sometimes if you get a traditional parent judge who's been trained on traditional format, if the kid doesn't have a value criterion, they'll just throw them out because they didn't do that.
Okay.
You know? You have any ideas for that?
Well, I'll say this about LD, like the whole value criteria concept at first is very like foreign to me. I sort of didn't understand how that structure exists, but it very much it's very similar to CX. It's just kind of a different phraseology for it. Like a value is sort of just a framework, right? It's a framework argument. How should we evaluate this around, right? And the criteria is like, how do we get to that point? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So does that not make sense?
Yeah, but I'm just wondering how they would work. Is there any way to work that in with the K? So
Yeah,
they still
absolutely,
have
because-
that, so
yeah, absolutely,
we're
because-
happy and.
Every K has an impact framing. Every K has a way that we should evaluate impacts or understand the world. And so you make that like sort of your value argument, I suppose, right?
Put that in there,
Yeah, absolutely. So you can take any sort of critical literature and so in debate, for example, there will be, or in policy, there'll just be like, hey, we should reevaluate our relationship to the ocean. Here's how we do it. We explore anxiety, right? That is a value criteria argument. Does that make sense? Like the value would be, we think that our relationship to the ocean is violent now, right? And it inspires violent relationships to the world. The criteria would be an education about that engages that anxiety. Does that make sense?
Because I think they can run these as long as they're not using that terminology that the parents are not going to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They
So-
definitely can. There's definitely a way to do it, and I think LD just really lends itself to being able to do it. The key to being successful, especially in front of judges that aren't so experienced, is just sort of, finding new ways to explain it, right? Just finding a way to explain it that's very simple, and the way to do that is just to read a lot. I heard thinking philosophically about debate lecture today. I think something that they said that was really interesting was you have to read things over and over again until you have the ability to explain it to people the way that you understood it on that third read. Does that make sense? And I thought that was like a very interesting way. It's difficult obviously for kids to be able to do that because they don't get a lot of chances, right? Like you kind of only get one chance to make a first impression in a debate round. But I thought that was really interesting. So it really emphasized to the kids that you have to read it enough to where you can explain it to someone on that last read. Sure. All right, so my email, ready?
Yes.
PEEJAY.MTZ@gmail, so like PJ Martinez, right? MTZ.
Peter, Josh, hey, can you come back?
Oh, sorry?
Can you come back?
Whenever. Yeah, sure. What time?
Right. Look at your schedule and see where she's got her schedule.
Okay.
Then I'll talk to you then.
Absolutely. So there's my email. If anyone has any questions, feel free